Hello and welcome. This is Penny Sansevieri with Author Marketing Experts. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how to know how to evaluate your book marketing, but also how to know if your book marketing is working or what you can do to maybe spice things up, ramp things up, restart the life of a book that maybe you had given up on. Now, I want to say up front, there is a lot of content in these slides. So you're probably going to want to maybe go over all or portions of it a couple of times because I did cram a lot in this class. I wanted to there's a lot to discuss. I mean, when it comes to book marketing, not all of the pathways are direct for all of us necessarily. So first, let me tell you just a little bit about myself. Obviously, my name is Penny Sansevieri. My company is Author Marketing Experts, and we do book marketing and publicity. And I'm also the author of 18 books, including How to Sell Books by the Truckload on Amazon. And this class, I also do a lot of teaching, obviously, because I've taught a few times for Alliance of Independent Authors, which is tremendous. But this class was really born out of a lot of one-on-one consultations that I do for authors. So, you know, when I talk to authors, when I meet with them at conferences, they really, sometimes it's hard for them to know how to really evaluate what's working, or even if they're doing all the right things. So we'll look at that today as well. So the first question that I get with regards to when I sit down with authors and talk to them about their marketing is, how should I market my book? And that's not a great question, because what happens with that, what tends to happen when you ask that question is a lot of ideas come from, well, I know somebody in my writing group and they did XYZ and that did really well for them, and maybe that's what I'll try to do. No two books, even though you may be writing in the same genre, no two books have the same experience with the same marketing tactics, which is why it gets so frustrating when you read sometimes these other authors like, oh, I'm doing really well with Facebook ads, and then you try them and they fall flat. And we'll look at that as well today. So the better question to ask is, will any of this, the question that I get is, will any of this help me sell more books? Because that's the first thing that folks want to know when they're doing anything in marketing, or when they're hiring us to market their books, is any of this actually going to help me sell books? And the challenge with that is that book sales isn't always a direct correlation to everything that you do. So book reviews, a book review won't help you sell books, maybe, but as we'll look at in a minute, most of what you're going to do in marketing is cumulative. We just want to make sure that all of that you're doing is adding up to the right platform for your book. One of the things that we look at when it comes to book marketing is maximizing exposure. So when you're looking at what are you doing right now to market your book, are you really maximizing exposure? Are you going for a route that is actually where your readers are? Are you copying what another author did? Well, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. If somebody says, hey, I did really well XYZ, maybe it's worth trying it out. But we know that repetitive exposure sells books, and 95% of books are sold word of mouth. That kind of goes back to what I said about, does one review sell books? Well, obviously depends on the review, right? If Oprah holds up your book and says, oh, this is fabulous, that's maybe considered her review, and you'll probably sell a lot of books from that. But in general, reviews, the accumulation of reviews on Amazon adds up. Even if like 95% of books are sold word of mouth, by definition, obviously that means that you're telling a friend and you're telling somebody, oh my gosh, this book is great. And so, you're sharing that with your tribe. And we'll look at that also in this class. But the idea really being that sometimes it's just a matter of, you have a great Amazon page, you're getting lots of great reviews, and we trust other people in general, right? We generally trust other reviewers, which is why Amazon has spent so much time policing their review process, because they know that consumers trust reviews. And when products or whatever services are, blasted with 100 or 200 5-star reviews, there's really something suspicious about that. So let's first look at finding a really quick path. Now, when I teach this class in person, one of the things that we talk about is success leaves clues. And looking up other similar authors in your genre and getting to know kind of what they're doing to promote their books could really be helpful to you in that. So to use the example of your, writer friend in your writers group who recommended something to you, if that person, has had success overall, so not just, oh, I got lucky with Facebook ads or something, but if that person has had success overall and is really somebody that you aspire, like that's really where you want to get with your book, that would be considered a good clue to sort of follow, right? But probably the easiest way for most of us to determine how to kind of, create a path, create a marketing plan, is start to Google your genre and add the word author. So for example, contemporary romance and author, and it'll pull up. Now you're going to get, this used to be a much cleaner search a couple of years ago, but now obviously you're going to get lots of ads. You're probably going to get lots of publishing companies, but you want to click through until you find other authors that are getting fairly high rank in Google using your genre. The reason that I like to do this little exercise is because it helps you to figure out who is getting, so if Google's paying attention to them, then they're probably doing something right. So their website's getting a significant amount of traffic. They're probably blogging, they're on social media. The social media acts as a feeder site and feeds traffic into their website. Those kinds of things are the pieces that you want to look for to see what somebody else is doing. So let me give you an example, right? So I did this once with a mystery author, and I told him, I said, all right, now I want you to go through this exercise and then let's talk about what you found out. He came back and he said, okay, well, there's this one author and he's blogging consistently and he's developing new, shorter version, easy to solve cases on his blog, right? Because he writes mysteries with one protagonist. He writes a whole series of mysteries with one protagonist. So this protagonist actually runs his blog, so to speak, and solves little mini mysteries on them, keeps readers going, right? Then one of the other things that he observed was that this particular author was only on one social media site, and we're going to talk about social media in this presentation as well. And, a couple of other things that he observed was the simplicity of this author's website and the use of, keywords that he had, like, for example, on the homepage of his website, which he kept very short in terms of the verbiage. Mystery authors specializing in thrillers, detective series, etc. So the author was very clear on what they were writing about. So their homepage didn't have, for example, stories about their dog, right? And if you've written books about dogs, and that's a whole different animal, right? No pun intended. But the author was very focused on, so he didn't have a lot of flash, right? But he was very, very focused on what his core audience wanted and where they showed up. So he wasn't on a whole bunch of social media sites. He just sort of focused on the one. And every time I do this exercise with authors, it comes up with surprising results. I've done this with cookbook authors who discover that, short little fun cookbook videos or cooking videos, are, the pathway to their success. And they need to be spending more of their time on YouTube and Pinterest and maybe Instagram. So these are the kinds of things that really help you to get an idea of what other authors in your genre are doing to pull in more reader attention and to get more success. There's going to be a whole bunch of links in these slides so that you'll be able to click through, so some handouts and stuff like that to kind of go with this presentation. Your reader profile brainstorm is one of those, and what this allows you to do is really profile your reader if you're a fiction author and listening to this, just like you sort of profile a character in your book, right? You know what motivates them, you know what drives them, you know where they're from, you know maybe what their hobbies are if you're getting that deep into your character. The reader profile does the same thing, but it does it for your reader. So you know where they hang out, you know what drives them, what motivates them to buy. And this will really help you to identify things that matter and let go of things that don't matter. Because a lot of what this class is really about is weeding out the things that don't matter so that you can focus on the ones that do. Hyper focus on your readers, start really narrow. One of the biggest success strategies that I've seen with authors, so when authors come to us to do their marketing, I can always sort of tell when I talk to them on the phone how narrowly and hyper focused that they are on their market. And I've talked to authors who, say, well, if I ask them who their market is, they'll say everybody needs to read this book. Everybody is too broad of a target and it's too hard to hit. Starting with a really narrowly focused readership will help you out greatly, and we'll dig more into that as we go through this presentation. So your marketing pie chart might be a little bit surprising, right? Where are you spending your time? Now, granted, for some of you, this is not going to probably be exactly what you're doing. Maybe your speaking events are driving sales, and that's great. So your percentage of under other events, et cetera, is going to be larger, right? But one of the things that I want to kind of drive home is the reader outreach and reviews pitching. So one of the things that is obviously extremely important are getting readers for your book, but not just for your one book, but for others. And also continually getting more reviews for your book, even if your book is older, and we'll talk a little bit about what to do if you have an older book. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how to fix what's wrong. And some of the really easy things that I see, other than, redirecting your marketing focus. Okay. So ebook pricing, in particular, because print book pricing is sometimes a little bit harder to determine whether or not, it's a little bit harder to drop the price on a print book, especially because somebody else is usually pricing that. But for your ebook, you have a lot of opportunity to really play around with this. Now, Kindle told me that their sweet spot, and this was at an event I was at a year or so ago, that their sweet spot for ebook pricing is $5.99, $2.99 to $5.99. I actually like ebook pricing that's somewhere south of $9.99. So be careful with overpricing your ebook. Of all of the things that I see in marketing, this is the number one issue related to book sales. So a lot of times what happens is that authors say, well, I really need to earn back the money that I invested in my marketing or in my book production up to this point, and I want to have my ebook priced at $14.99, or unfortunately in some cases higher. And that's not a great way, because you're not going to get any sales. I mean, not that consumers are necessarily so price sensitive with ebooks, but in particular, if you don't have a fan base built up yet, if you are just starting out, you really have to price competitively. In some cases, when authors have, matter of fact, I talked to an author at a conference a couple of months ago, and she said to me, look, because we were having this discussion on ebook pricing. She said, listen, she goes, I have been waiting for the fourth book in this book series, and the author priced it at $12.99. And she said, it's higher than I paid for the other books in the series, but now I am a fan. She's built up my interest, and I'm willing to pay that. So once you have built up a platform, you can start charging a little bit more for your books, but just be careful of that, early on. Price rotation, if you have a number of books, particularly in a series, I always like to do price rotations. And what I do with those, what I recommend with those, is that the author changes the price on one of their books in a series, maybe once a quarter or once every other month. You run some kind of a promo or a special. It depends a little bit on how many books you have. If you only have 2 books out, it gets a little harder to do that once every other month, but you can certainly do it once a quarter. This is a big question, right? And it's kind of crazy, because you think, well, my book, I love my book cover. My book cover is great, but is it really right for your market? And, if you're designing a book cover, and this is an interesting process, right? When it comes to the design process of a book cover, we're looking at these books on big monitors generally, right? Depending on the size of your screen. But really what you want to do is you want to view the book cover in a thumbnail, because at the end of the day, that's what you're selling, is you're selling your book cover in a thumbnail. If you have scrolly font, if you have lots and lots of stuff on your book cover, it may not be, it may be technically right for the market, but it's poorly designed. So take a look at other similar books in your genre and make sure and be really, and this is a hard conversation, because one of the first things, once we finish writing our books and we're done falling in love with our books and we're ready to get them published, we fall in love with our book covers. And it's hard to have, in some cases, it's hard to have a conversation with authors and say, look, your book cover could be better. But at the end of the day, readers do judge a book by its cover, and they spend on average of maybe 3 seconds, if you're lucky, on your, on your book cover. So are you marketing to the right people? It's kind of crazy, but it has to be said. And this is a great line, actually, that came out of a writer's conference I was at. Don't hand a puppy to a cat person. It's kind of interesting, and I see this very much so in genre fiction. And I'll give you an example of a fantasy author. So there are many, and those of you who write fantasy, you're probably nodding right now. There are many sub genres in fantasy. Not that there aren't in other markets, but there are lots and lots of subgenres, in so many that I can't even cite them for this particular call. Not that you would want me to. But every readers are very particular in what they want, right? So, know who you're going after. And remember, a few slides ago, I said, be hyper focused on your reader, be hyper focused on your reader. And particularly make sure that you're not overlooking the fact that maybe you're in a subgenre that you need to, focus on. An easier example of this is cozy mystery versus thrillers, right? So I would never, as a publicist, I would never pitch a cozy mystery book to a thriller blog, because they'll come back and say, if they even write me back, they'll say, what are you thinking? You should know better. It's two very, very different markets, right? It's the Jessica Fletchers versus, the thriller, Jack Ryan, whatever. They're very, very different areas. So make sure that you're pitching to the right people. Super important. Age matters. So how old is your book? And do you, and this happens a lot with nonfiction, and I feel your pain because I write nonfiction, and, my stuff, my Amazon book has to be updated every year. All of my books pretty much have to get updated pretty frequently. And you may want to, update your book or update a few chapters of it or something just to keep it relevant. One of the things that I've done with some of my books is I will keep the same book. So for example, if there is just a chapter update that needs to happen, and I, want to pull the book offline and update that chapter, I can go in and update that chapter and re-upload the book. But sometimes what I'll do is I'll make, I'll make some changes throughout, but essentially still keep the same core of the book up on Amazon and change the cover to reflect, let's say, a 2020 release of the book. So the next step is, your Amazon book description. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on in the slides, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But when an author tells me that their book isn't selling, or that they were running ads, they're running Amazon ads, or they're running Facebook ads, and these ads are not converting, one of the first things that I will do is I'll look at their book description. And I can almost guarantee you that there's a problem with their book description, which, as I said, we'll talk about more in a minute. But I also think that, as I said, people like what other people like. Having enough reviews on your book page can make a big difference. And it can make a difference between somebody buying the book and somebody just kind of passing you over. So some tools to be successful: a great website, a newsletter sign up. I love newsletter signups, and we'll talk about more about reader, direct to reader stuff in just a minute. A great book cover, obviously a great book, a marketable topic, and consistent marketing. And consistent marketing, by the way, doesn't have to be you quitting your job and marketing full time. It can be, I'm going to do these 1 to 5 things every day, and see, and know that these are the right things that I need to be doing. And that's what I'm going to focus on. Okay. Hard question, right? Are you doing enough really? Because this is where a lot of times authors get kind of sort of stuck, right? What does your marketing pie chart look like? I showed you, generally where I see authors need to be spending, more of their time. What else are you doing, and are you doing the right things? So sometimes what happens, and I've had this happen over the 20 years that I've been in business, I've had this happen more times than I can count. An author will put their book up on Amazon and say, I'm just going to wait and see what it does. Trust me when I say the book will do absolutely nothing. Amazon is not there to help you get more attention for your book. They're a vehicle. And in fact, if you put your book up on Amazon and you don't do anything with it, you almost cannot recover from the damage that does to your algorithm. So let's talk for a second on getting more reviews, okay? And we're going to spend a little bit of time on the review portion, and then we're going to hop on over to some more topics and advertising and Goodreads and all that good stuff. As I said, we have a lot of slides in this deck, so you may want to rewatch certain aspects of this. Pre-publication reviews, if you have a book coming out in a couple of months, you can start early pitching it to some reviewers. Most of the time, the majority of the books that we work with tend to be post-publication reviews. So these are reviews that will come in up to 3 months, maybe even sometimes 6 months after publication date. Amazon reviews, blogger pitching, and reader reviews. Now, most of these are a little bit time sensitive. So in other words, if you have a book that's a year old, it's going to be hard to get any of this stuff with the exception of reader reviews. As your book ages, you start to age out of various areas. Obviously, pre-publication, that's kind of out once you hit publication date. Post-publication tends to dwindle at 4 months, right? When your book is 4 and 5 months old, it gets to be a little bit harder to find post-publication reviewers. Amazon reviews, and Amazon reviewers, actually, those folks get hit up so much for reviews that, again, as your book ages, it starts to get harder to get their attention. Blogger pitching is the same thing. But reader reviews, if you have a book that's older and if you have a backlist, your reader reviews are definitely something that you can continually go after. So let's talk a little bit about getting more reviews. Now, focusing first off on bloggers. If you haven't done any blogger pitching and your book is still relatively new, there's lots and lots of blogger directories out there. You can do a Google search of book bloggers in your genre, and it'll pull up a whole bunch of romance bloggers, right? For example, in the romance genre. And you can, go on to those blogs, and you really want to be careful when you're pitching bloggers that you want to make sure and, read their guidelines. So if a blogger says, hey, I don't want independently published books, or I don't want this particular, genre niche or something, you definitely want to stay away from that. So read their guidelines, keep your pitches super short, 1 paragraph. But blogger pitching is definitely a good way to get more, attention for a book. Amazon reader reviews, Amazon top reviewers, it's getting harder and harder to find lots and lots of top reviewers for Amazon because some of them have fallen away or they've gotten busy. New ones come online all the time. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of people who review on Amazon, obviously, but the top reviewers, top contributors, or top 50 reviewers, or even top 100 reviewers get a little bit harder to find. And that's why you want to pitch these folks, particularly very early. One way that you do it, or one way that I recommend, because Amazon got rid of their blogger directory. They used to have a really lovely blogger directory where you could just kind of go, or, review directory for their Amazon reviewers. Most of them are connected to blogs. So it was really easy to, find them, get their email address, pitch them, but Amazon's since done away with that. So one of the ways that I find, or that I direct authors to find top reviewers, is go on to similar books and take a look and see if anybody has, who was reviewed from a top Amazon reviewer, who has reviewed that particular book. Click on their profile and it takes you over to their Amazon page, which then oftentimes has their email address in the about piece. If you click on the about, it'll show you Dee's, how to get a hold of Dee, or if she's connected to a blog. And I mentioned early on, I used the term blogger when I mentioned the Amazon directory, because lots of these folks are connected to blogs. So if they're writing their review on Amazon, they're probably also cross-posting it to their blog as well. So advertising really quickly, and then we're going to hop into the Goodreads stuff and talk a little bit more about publishing timelines and social media before we get back into the Amazon conversation. I like using advertising as a booster, but one of the things, and this is separate and apart from Amazon ads, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but a lot of authors will use Facebook ads consistently, and they'll use them just to announce their book or just to keep their book top of mind with their readers. And that's not, it's okay. It's not a particularly great strategy, because so ads need to drive consumers to do something, right? And generally, I only use Facebook ads or Instagram ads to promote a book discount. So remember how I talked about the price rotation a few slides ago? I will, if I have an author, let's say, for example, and that author has a book discount going on for a few days coming up next week, I might run some Facebook ads for that book discount in particular, and that's it. So I'm going to start and stop that campaign, because I'm careful how I want to spend those ad dollars, but also, readers need. So the thing that drives a better click-through rate on ads, in particular on Facebook, is if there's some kind of a deadline, right? So this offer expires tonight, or you have only until tomorrow morning to, take up. So some kind of a deadline will greatly increase your click-through rate and your conversion rate, right? That's why I like to use those ads only for promos. Running ads for the sake of just running ads is just not a good way to spend money. Again, separate and apart from Amazon ads, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So Goodreads events, I know there's a lot of copy on some of these slides, so I'm not going to read every single bullet point, but I really love doing Goodreads events, and they're free, and you can do them for anything, right? So you can do them for, if you have an upcoming book signing, it doesn't always have to be an online event. If you're doing a Facebook event, if you're doing anything that you've got going, you can definitely put together a Goodreads event. It just helps you to stay top of mind with your network as well. I like doing Goodreads giveaways. I like doing those before the book launches if possible, but definitely after the book launches. I do ebooks. I tend to do, because Goodreads, now they charge you $120 or whatever to do the Goodreads giveaways. I like to do those for the ebook, because then they are sending them and I don't have to mail books out, which makes it so much easier. But the way the Goodreads giveaways have changed is it gets added to everybody who enters the Goodreads giveaway. The book gets added to their bookshelf, and it's just I really like the Goodreads giveaways. There are fewer people doing them, so the odds are better that you're going to get a higher number of people signing up for your giveaway, and it's a great way to raise exposure within your network and to let readers know that you have this book. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about BookBub ads, because I like doing those as well. And when I talk about BookBub ads, I'm not talking about the ads where you're spending $800 or $1,000 to buy an ad in their newsletter. I'm talking about the ads at the bottom of the newsletter. So it's really a terrific way to get visibility within a newsletter of your particular genre. but not having to necessarily get an ad in. It's great to get a BookBub ad. I love them, but they're harder to get. And as I mentioned, they're also very pricey. So I like doing BookBub ads as well. BookBub profile is something super simple that you can do, and it's free. And I've talked to authors who have 800 to 1,000 followers on BookBub, which is kind of a fun thing, because every time that you release a new book, your followers are notified. So one of the other things that I find that works really well is to start local to go big. I love doing local events. I love doing local media for authors, regardless of the genre. I like doing that because it is a great way to drive interest. And I've had authors who focus almost exclusively doing local events and local media and sell thousands and thousands of books. I talked to an author, this actually goes back a few years, and she said she sold 6,000 books, local, just doing local. She says she's done no blogger pitching, no reviews. She's really just focused on her local area, and she doesn't necessarily live in a big town, but she's everywhere. Everywhere you go, you see her book. Her bookmarks are in the stores or dry cleaners or whatever, and she's doing local signings and whatnot. So consider, maybe focusing locally in an exclusive way isn't your thing, but certainly if you haven't done any local media or done any local events in libraries, bookstores, whatever, it's a really good opportunity to get more attention for your book. So the things that don't work, just in terms of if we're looking at fixing a book marketing campaign that maybe isn't doing quite so well. Ads in the New York Times book section, and I only use this sort of as an example because it's kind of it's something that authors have come to me many times and say, I'm running an ad in the New York Times book section. I'm spending $5,000. I'm going to see what I get from that. And most of the time, you're not going to get a whole lot, maybe nothing. And I just feel like that money could definitely be spent somewhere else. So let me get back to that slide. Spray and pray is another thing where, you're just throwing a whole bunch of stuff up against the wall, or spraying a whole bunch of stuff up against the wall and hoping that some of it sticks. There's no magic bullet. So there's no one thing that sells lots and lots of books. And in some cases, you may hear from, an author that as I mentioned, either through networking or a writer's group who says, oh my gosh, I did XYZ and that worked out really, really well. And sometimes it works well for one person and doesn't really work for the other. The other thing that I encourage you is not to wait too long between publishing books, because what tends to happen is that readers lose interest. If you only have one book in you, obviously this doesn't relate to you, but most of us have multiple books in us. So waiting a long time, a couple of years or a year, even in between books, is a long time to make readers wait for your next book, especially if it's, books in a series. So things that I really like that work well are, very, very, very specific ads. Reviews help to get people talking, and, people like what other people like, as I've mentioned. You don't necessarily have to be blogging, but I like the idea of content creation to the degree that you have the time to do so. It also helps with your visibility on Google. It helps with your optimization, your website optimization. Blogger pitching, we talked about that. And solving a reader's problem or need. And this is very true even for if you've written fiction, because obviously readers come to you to be entertained, right? So these are the things that I find that tend to really work above and beyond anything else you might do tactically for your marketing. So publishing timelines, pre-publication, we talked about that. Post-publication, is a book ever too old to market? The answer to that really is yes and no. Most fiction books can be marketed forever. Especially if you have a series. I've had authors who have, single books or a backlist or books in a series that that have done really well, and they're several years old, and they continue to market them, and they continue to gain attention for them. The other thing though too is that if you have multiple books out there, if you have a library, if you have a backlist, I mean, it's really a good opportunity because you're always, unless you are a mega best-selling author, in which case you probably wouldn't be listening to this class, you're never really tapped out on, you're never really going to tap out on readers. So it's a good opportunity to find new readers if you have an older book. For nonfiction, that gets a little bit harder, right? Some books in nonfiction do age out of their market fairly quickly. So I think books on, health books tend to be, we're because things in health news is changing all the time, we're not so inclined to buy a book health related that's a little bit older because there's always new information coming out. Books on finance, that market also ages. So just keep in mind that in some cases you may want to update your book, and we talked about that earlier. It's fairly easy to do. So social media, and I'm going to cut right to the chase here because I think a lot of us spend a lot of time spinning our wheels on social media. And when I talk to authors in particular about their social media, that's one of the biggest things that frustrates them, is that they feel like they're spending all of this time in social and not a lot of time writing. But when you start to dig into what other similar authors do in your market, so in other words, what they're where they're spending their time on social, and how often they're on social and what they're doing, you're going to really start to see that, as I always like to say in my classes, it's not about being everywhere, but it's about it being everywhere that matters. So I would rather that you abandoned sites that aren't working for you and focus on the ones that are. And maybe for you, that's Instagram, or maybe it's LinkedIn, or maybe it's Twitter, although Twitter's become super noisy and kind of weird. Or maybe it's Instagram. But even if I would rather see an author do one social media site and do it incredibly well, as opposed to being on every single social media site and not doing any of it very well. So I really recommend that it's good that you're on social, even if it's just one social media site. No, you can't just run Facebook ads. And the other thing about social media is that social media doesn't necessarily sell books, but it helps to raise your engagement. So the idea really is that you want to have an engaging social media presence where people are commenting and responding, and your posts aren't just sort of floating by people and nobody cares. But the other piece of social media that really matters is the fact that it helps to increase your market visibility. So the marketing rule of 7, take 7 touches to your book, message, or product before somebody decides to buy your book. And social media helps to contribute to that. It contributes to that number of touches, right? So social media itself, one social media post, as I said, one review, doesn't necessarily sell books, but it's all cumulative. So you just want to make sure that you're accumulating the right amount of momentum and going after the right places. That's why I'm fairly stingy about social media. Like I'm really careful about, sitting down and telling an author, whoa, you need to be on every social media platform, because honestly, nobody really has the time for that. Unless you're just cross-posting the same thing across all social media platforms. And even that usually doesn't work, because social media platforms, each of them has a particular, there's a particular thing that drives each of these platforms, right? But take a look and see how your social media is, how your platforms are, and your engagement. How many likes are you getting to a particular post? How much are people really responding to you? And that's a good way of also determining where you really need to be spending your time. Okay. So I love tribe building. I think that is one of the biggest ways to, it's one of the biggest ways to help sell more books, is by building your reader tribe. If you have a newsletter list, or if you have maybe it's people who follow you on social media, but I like to try and put them into a newsletter, because a newsletter is something you control. You can't really control your social media, right? I mean, if Facebook or Instagram or whatever decided that you had done something against their terms of service tomorrow, they could get rid of your social media account. So I really like to have people in a newsletter, and readers can absolutely make or break your they can absolutely make or break your book. They can make or break your they can, lots and lots of reader reviews can really help to boost the exposure for your for your book and for your series, certainly. So the call to action is really just a letter in the back of your book. And what that call to action does is it invites readers to contact you and or to review your book on Amazon. Okay, so your call to action should have something in it for them. So the whiff factor, what's in it for me? For example, if you contact me today, and we'll enter you into, we'll include you in our newsletter list and enter you to win a free gift, $5 Amazon gift card or Starbucks gift card or whatever. And I've actually had authors who will do a newsletter list, who put together a newsletter, an ethical bribe, as we call it, for their newsletter list. So what an ethical bribe is you give something to get something. So you give them a chance to win a $5 gift card, which sounds ridiculously low, but believe it or not, it's kind of fun. You can get a latte, or you can get a video or an ebook or something for that $5 gift card. So for a chance to win that every month, they sign up to your newsletter, right? And you promise obviously not to spam them and etc. But build the call to action, the letter in the back of the book is a great way to build your reviews, but also to build your reader tribe. So I recommend putting the letter in an ebook, right? Mostly because of the click. So I'll have like the email address, the author email address. I'll have a click to the book page if I'm asking for a review. So it's a lot more of a direct connection. I put the letter in the back of the book, but I put it behind the last page of the book. So not necessarily behind if you have an index or if you have any kind of back matter. I will always put it the last, when you have the end, that's where the letter goes. And the reason I do that is because the algorithm on the Amazon app for the ebook, so the Kindle app for the ebook, automatically signals to send you back to the Amazon page. And you'll see this when you get to the end of a book. It sends you over to, would you like to review the book? Do you want to get other books? So you want to make sure that you're not triggering that. But I always recommend to authors that they build their reader tribe and put a letter in the back of the book and encourage readers to contact them and or ask for a review. But definitely you want to start to create that author reader connection. One of the things that I've seen, I've had some authors who build up their reader tribes, who build up their newsletter list, and when they release a book, they're getting, they're pulling in between 50 and 100, in some cases 150 reviews for their book just from their reader tribe. And if you have a newsletter, I would say, when was the last time that you asked for a review, right? So ask for a review if you have a network of people that you're connected to. Definitely, there's no harm in asking your readers for a review. And if they have reviewed it, they'll probably let you know. And if they haven't, they'll say, oh my gosh, I need to review, such and such book, and they'll get right on it. So it is really, really helpful. And this will also, for those of you who have books that are already out, you can always add the letter if you have access to the ebook, obviously. You can add the letter to the book file for books that have already been released or have maybe even a couple of years old. But it does help, it's an aggregator. It really does help to continually build reviews on your books on Amazon without you having to get out there and pitch them. So let's talk finally, sorry, I know this has been a really, really long presentation. We're going to spend the last several slides just talking about Amazon in particular, because one of the most important things that authors spend a surprisingly small amount of attention on is Amazon. And one of the things that we know is that everything matters on Amazon. And I'm going to walk you through the book page in particular, But absolutely everything matters, from your book page to the keywords that you use to how your book is optimized, even Amazon ads, right? So I alluded to the fact earlier that the exclusion to that ad slide was Amazon ads. I like to run Amazon ads all the time, and I'm careful about, how what I'm spending. So I'm not gonna, throw everything in the kitchen sink at these ads. But I do like to run them consistently, because one of the things that I know from having done quite a bit of testing on these is that Amazon ads do help with your algorithm as well, your Amazon algorithm. So we don't really know exactly how many books that are on Amazon, but we know that it's approximately 7 million. It's probably, maybe closer to 8 million, because there are 4,500 books published every day in this country. But Amazon is noisy and distracting, right? So this is a screenshot of one of my books, and so far so good, right? So you see, okay, a book description, blah, blah, but then you click down just a little bit further and you see the also bots or the also reds. And then you click down a little bit further, hang on just one second, and you start to see all these ads pop up. And it just gets to be a little bit, I mean, if I kept scrolling down this page, you would see more and more, another row of sponsored products and Amazon promoting a couple of different series. So it's really hard, because Amazon does, I mean, obviously this is their website. So whatever your book, if your book isn't taking up a lot of space, so if you have a really short book description and not a lot of reviews, they're going to cram a whole bunch of stuff on, onto your book page. So interestingly enough, this is really where authors cut corners, as I mentioned, book cover, but that's really, that's really, really important. Your write-up, your book description, and reviews. And I'm going to go through this checklist, the Amazon book page checklist, which you'll obviously get a copy of when you get the slide deck. So a strong book cover. And when I talk about book page checklist, I mean, really, regardless of the genre you're in, each of these bullet points should matter to you. So a strong book title, obviously, if your book is out, that's going to be a little bit harder, but you can always add a subtitle to it. Descriptive subtitle that make people want to read your book is really, really important. A great book description, but most importantly is going to be the formatting, right? So the formatting with bullets and italics, and I have a couple of examples coming up that I want to, share with you. So short paragraphs, because people scan, they don't read. A standout review. I love to put those standout reviews early on. So at the top of, before you actually start with the book description, and keywords. So if you've done your Amazon optimization, you want to pepper your book description with keywords. So here's an example, and I promised y'all some examples. Here's an example of Sneezy the Snowman, which is such a cute book, right? This author is obviously doing really, really well with this book. Tons of reviews, #1 bestseller. Book is already, 6 years old. But one of the things that I would really love to see on this page is she's got to have, at this point, this author has got to have some great reviews. And I would really love to see this book description start out with, maybe a standout quote from a review, right? So hang on one second, let me get back to that page. And probably have a longer, a little bit of a longer book description, right? So just again, to add in maybe some keywords. She is already doing great, but I think she can probably continue to do, even better, possibly, because obviously she has something that's really hit home for readers. So, and then this is a case where this author has a great book cover and pretty interesting book description, though I would have liked to have seen it maybe just kind of a tad bit longer. And she also has reviews, and I would have really liked to have seen one or more of those reviews before we get into Georgette DeLuca's Life is a Mess and She Knows It. I would have liked to have seen that particular book description start out with a standout review first, because I think she's got it all going on here with this book, probably also a subtitle. So I really want to know when I land on this book, like I really want to know, is this a mystery? Is this a, you know, is this literary fiction? Like, what is this book? And having a subtitle, which I'll show you some examples in a minute, would really help here. Now, this is a book that has, like, if you look at this at first glance, you think, oh, this author's just got it all going on, right? A great book cover, great book cover. This is actually what drew me to the page, was the book cover, which is, you know, high marks. But the issue that I have with this is that there's a subtitle, and it's great. I mean, it's great to have a subtitle, but the subtitle isn't great, and there also maybe a typo in it. So a psychological thriller that will have you at the edge of your seat or on the edge of your seat, depending on where you are in the world, right? So it's like using color with a U. At or on could be used interchangeably. But if I'm looking at a US market, at is, and I looked this up, at is definitely wrong. So, and I would also probably want to have this a little bit shorter, because what happens, so you want to have a subtitle, but you don't necessarily want to have a subtitle that makes the book page look super heavy. So when I have all of that copy at the top, I'm probably not going to read all of that. The only thing I'm going to see is psychological thriller. And I would have probably dropped the rest, right? But this author has he's sort of kept that same kind of model throughout all of his books, as you can see. But the other thing that I want to kind of call your attention to is that one of the things that Amazon pays attention to, now he has really great book covers throughout all of his books. If you have older books with a lower review star ranking, that can impact all of your books on Amazon. So one of the things that I recommend, if you have multiple books, as I cited earlier, absolutely everything matters, right? One of the things that you probably want to do is take a look and see if you can raise that star ranking by maybe getting some more reviews, or maybe there's just a problem with the book. Maybe it needs, like, I didn't read Before She's Gone. I don't know why he only has 3 stars out of 130 reviews, but maybe it's an editing problem. Maybe it's a story problem. Maybe the book needed, you know, a deeper copy edit or something like that. It's probably worth looking into if you have a book that has a lower star ranking or just hasn't done well overall, because the Amazon algorithm can impact that book, not just that book, but any other books under your umbrella. So all the books sort of tethered to your account can be impacted by one book that isn't doing very well. So just kind of keep that in mind. And this doesn't necessarily mean that none of his books are going to sell well, right? But obviously there's an issue with one of them that has, you know, for whatever reason, maybe been problematic. And it's a fairly new book too, which is a shame. But I do like to have subtitles. I think subtitles, fiction or nonfiction, is always a great idea. Just make sure that you're keeping them a little bit shorter. So, you know, like for example, under What She Forgot, I probably would have just said a gripping thriller. I don't know that it necessarily needs to say that, will keep you guessing. So you can use your keywords in your subtitle, definitely. If you've already titled your book and you don't have the opportunity to use it for the book title, and you can also use it in the book description. So making sure that your book page is focused on the core audience, is tight, is really, really important. And I hope that this class has been helpful. I know it's been really long, so I hope I've kept your attention. I hope it's been helpful. I want to just kind of, we'll click over to the links in just a second so that you have those. These are my books. They're all up on Amazon. And if you're interested in grabbing one, and here's the links to the download. So the Reader Profile Brainstorm. There's a blogger tracking sheet, which I didn't mention during the blogger discussion, so you can keep track of bloggers that you've targeted. Your quarterly Amazon planner, and our most popular is our monthly book marketing planner, which people just really love. We just re-released it at the end of last year, and made a bunch of updates to it. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for spending time with me in this class. I hope this has been really helpful. You can reach me if you have any direct feedback at penny@amarketingexpert.com. And I wish you every success with your book marketing. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.